Hello and welcome to a new episode of Josh's Car Corner, where I'm going to be doing a little bit of general maintenance on the GTO. I've owned it for 14 and a half years now, and the steering just doesn't feel as good as it used to when I first bought the car. I did change the outer tie rods back in 2016, and that did help a little bit, but it's gotten back to that point again and maybe a little looser. I just feel play on center when I'm driving down the road, and I really don't care for that, so I'm trying to get rid of it and get this thing feeling the way it was when I first bought it. So along with changing outer tie rods, once again, I'm also going to be changing the inner tie rods, and while I have it all apart, I'm also going to be changing that bushing for the steering rack, because you have to take the outer tie rod off in order to get that out. So I've already got that side all buttoned up and done. I'm going to show you how to take this side apart. There is a little bit of extracurricular work involved to put it all back together, but it's not that bad, so let's get to it. To start with, here are all the tools that you are going to need for this project. You're going to need a pair of pliers, a pair of diagonal cutters, a pair of flush cutters, 2 monkey wrenches, or plumber's wrenches, whatever you want to call them, a 19mm box wrench, a 15mm box wrench, a breaker bar, some brake cleaner. You're also going to want some penetrating lubricant like PD Blaster or WD-40. You're going to need an M14 by 1.5 tap tool, and you can slide that into a 10mm deep well socket on a wrench. You'll need that. And last but not least, you're going to need an inner tie rod tool. I rented this one from O'Reilly's for $100. Take it back, get my money back, and be on the road. Last but not least, you're also going to need a bottle of red Loctite. Okay, 2 more tools I forgot to mention. You are also going to need a mallet and a pickle fork to get the outer tie rod off. So to start with, there's going to be a cotter pin above the nut for your outer tie rod. You just need to bend those fingers back and knock the cotter pin out. You should get a new one with your replacement tie rod. It's a 19mm nut that you have to take off in order to get this tie rod out of here. So once you got the nut off, you can take your pickle fork and get it between the seal and the knuckle and just hammer a little bit, and it should break loose. There we go. All right, now that that's out, I can show you how to get it off of the inner tie rod. All right, so I've got the outer tie rod disconnected, and I can tell already that this inner tie rod is shot. Look at this. This thing is loose as a goose. There is definitely play in there, so I'm glad I'm going to be replacing this. So in order to get this off, we have to use our 2 big monkey wrenches. We got a 24mm nut here, and then there actually is a flat spot cut right here that you can get another wrench on. You got to work this nut up this way by turning it to the right clockwise. And once that's done, you can back off the outer tie rod. There's a procedure to that I'll show you once I get this nut loose. Okay, the nut is loose, and this is where you use the 15mm. You use the 15mm wrench as a gauge to let you know if the inner tie rod is turned when you were trying to break this nut loose. You need to know exactly where this thing was at its starting position, because now we have to take the outer out, and we're going to count how many turns it takes to get this thing off. Then we know how many turns we need to put into the new outer tie rod to get it back in the same place. So I'm going to go ahead and put the phone down, count how many it takes, and then we'll get other parts off. Okay, as you can see, I've got the outer off. It took 12 5/8 turns for it to disengage from the threads and come off of the inner. So I can get rid of this wrench now, and now I can get in here with my flush cutters and start cutting all the zip ties that are in here holding this boot on, which is actually called the bellows. Okay, I have now got the bellows off. You would just want to twist this as you pull so this part doesn't roll underneath itself and you don't tear it and cause damage. These are pretty strong and they shouldn't be torn. If they are, definitely replace them. You don't want to get dirt in this fitting. So now we need to use this guy. So this is the inner tie rod tool. So like I said, you get these from an auto parts store, you rent them. The way this works is it's got an outer collar. You turn this and you take the tool like this, that is the right size for your tie rod. You slide it in here once it's on the inner tie rod, and then you turn this collar and lock it in, and now you can pull against it and you can turn, and you put a 1/2 inch breaker bar on it to turn these things out. Now the trick to these inner tie rods is, from the factory, they are installed with a roll pin that you cannot remove. So as you back out the tie rod, it's going to chew up the threads on the steering rack. This is why we need the tapping tool. We need to re-tap those threads once we get this thing out. So I'm going to get this thing in here and I'll show you turning it out. I can tell you from turning the other one out, it feels kind of weird, but I'll get this thing on and we will get to it. Okay, as you can see, I have now got the tool on there. Now I want to show you what this looks like so you can see how it goes on. So see how there are 2 flat edges cut into that end of the inner tie rod, that's what the tool is grabbing. So it can only go on 2 directions. So every 180 degrees, it can lock in there. And it's got room to flex and move around kind of and be on an odd angle. So even if you can't get the knuckle out of the way, which you can't, you can still use this thing. So you just got to put it on the breaker bar like this and start. You have to also keep pulling on the tube as you're doing this so it doesn't disengage from the inner. Yep. And it will probably disengage on you a couple of times. Just be patient with it. This is not rocket science. All right, that one is out. So loosen the collar here. Tool comes out, inner comes out. Yeah, and look at this thing. Look how shot that is. That should not move around like that. It should be really nice and tight. And its own weight should definitely not be able to make it move. So now I can get to cleaning out these threads. Just clean the grease off of here. All this grease came from the inner itself. It's not coming from the rack. As long as the seals in your rack are still good, there shouldn't be any fluid in here. It should just be grease from those things. So I'll get all that cleaned out and then we'll start cutting new threads. Okay, the hardest part of using this tap tool is getting it to start, figuring out where it wants to fall into the threads and start turning. So it's best to start by doing that part by hand, and then once you've found that home, you can then start turning it in with the wrench. Now you just want to go slow. I would basically turn back 90 degrees, then start to engage it. If it doesn't engage, go back another 90 degrees, try to engage it, and just keep doing that until you find the starting point. It should be going in flat and straight, and then you can start working it in. This is where you're going to want some sort of penetrating oil, WD-40, PP Blaster. Just spray it in there to lubricate the tool as it cuts. You want to turn, and if it starts to get difficult, back off a quarter turn and then start going again. After you've done that 2 or 3 times, it's probably a good idea to back the whole tool out. It's going to be full of steel filings from doing its cutting. You want to clean those off, go back in there, start cutting again. And once it bottoms out, you're done cutting and you can pull the whole thing out. Okay, second pass. Look how much I got out this time. Even more stuff, so glad I'm doing this. Now, there's one more thing to do after doing all that, is you want to take brake cleaner and spray it down in there to blast out any other remaining metal filings that are in there. Now, obviously, wear safety glasses, and better yet, don't look at it when you do this. It's gonna spray back at you, and you do not want to get this in your eyes. Yeah. There. Now it's nice and clean on the inside, and we're ready to put the new inner in. Okay, I've got my new tie rod here ready to install. Now, just so you know that this is a Petters inner tie rod. The part number on it is PRE1203. So the only thing I'm going to do before I install this is I'm going to put Loctite red on the threads. Because there's no roll pin in there, I need to make sure this thing isn't ever going to back out. So some Loctite red will do the job. It's packed full of brand new grease right there. Try not to touch it and get that grease all over your fingers. And once that is done, just thread it home, and then we can put the tool back on there, and we can start and we can get it tightened down. There we go. All right, that is tight. So I can get the tool out of there. Perfect. Now I can put the bellows back on. Now I cut the zip ties, so I'm going to have to replace those. I was at the auto repair shop. I'll show you what they recommended for putting these back on. So what the guy at O'Reilly's recommended for doing the big end of the bellows is these. These are stainless steel zip ties. So you push one end in like this, and then they've got a tang on them so they can't back out. They're a little hard to get started. Once it's in there, yeah, it can't back out. So I'm going to put this in there. So what I'll do is I'll take a pliers, and then I'll take a flat-bladed screwdriver, which is somewhere around here, but I'll pry it right here in this little rise section right here, and then I'll pull as tight as I can with the pliers to cinch this thing down. Then I'll bend it back over itself, and then I'll snip the excess off. And it won't make it so it can't move. This can still move around, but it's snug enough that it won't let the bellows go back over the lip that's in the steering rack, and that is what matters. So I'll go ahead and get this installed. Okay, as you can see, the bellows is back on. Here is that stainless steel zip tie, and I rotated the little tang up there that I cut way to the top so I wouldn't ever accidentally touch it and slice my finger open. And then on this end, I just used a small hose clamp to tighten that down. Again, it's got a lip that holds it, so it doesn't have to be super tight, just snug enough so it can't come back. And then I'm using, once again, a box wrench to find my home position for when I put this thing in. So it's 12 5/8 turns. I spun it back on. This is the new Petters outer tie rod. This neoprene washer here is just used as a bushing, just to make sure that the rubber isn't rubbing on the knuckle where it bolts here, because it could, I guess in their mind, it could conceivably tear it apart over time. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this torqued down. Now, because it's a castle nut, what you have to do is just make sure that one of those cut sections in it lines up with the hole so you can put the cotter pin through. So this doesn't have to be reamed down to the dickens, and it does have to be tight, but it's more important that the castle nut lines up with the hole in the stud so you can put the cotter pin through. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that done. Okay, as you can see, we've got our new castle nut and cotter pin in there. Everything's tightened down. This bolt is tightened down too. You gotta make sure you tighten that down after you get everything situated, so this can't turn. Not that it really should be able to, but you do need to tighten that down. So if you want to change the steering rack bushing, the time to change it is before you put the right-hand side back together with the bellows and everything, because it has to slide off the rack and come off this side with the inner tie rod. So you can see I've got it undone. 19mm bolt on the bottom, 18mm nut on top. You have to take the bolt and nut off on this side and just loosen them on the other side so the rack doesn't drop out of the car. And once you've done that, you can just rotate this thing out, and then I'll show you putting in the new bushing. Okay, so here is the old bushing, here is the new one. I got this thing all cleaned up inside and out. You'll get a pack of grease with the bushing, or it's the same grease you would use on any polyurethane bushing. Grease it inside, grease it outside, slip it in there, and then we can get it reinstalled. Well, that was a giant pain in the ass. You have to press super hard while twisting that thing on to get it on there because it's so tight. But once you get past that little lip there, you're home free. So now I can go ahead and put the bellows on and put all this together. Now, even though the car is all back together, the work is not done. I've changed bits of the suspension, which means I have changed the geometry, so a front end alignment is now crucial to have done. So I'm going to finish this episode after the front end alignment gets completed. Okay, I just got the specs of the alignment back, and according to them, I had the right front toe pretty darn close. It was towed out 0.4 degrees, but the left front was towed out over 2 degrees, and that was the problem. So you can clearly see the before right there, and here is the after. All green, all happy. Now, I still have got less right front caster than left front caster, but they won't adjust that. I'm gonna have to do that. I've got to move some washers on that radius rod bushing and bring that forward, but I'm not gonna do that until I get new rear toe rods, heavy duty rods that can be adjusted again, because my factory ones are locked up. I am excited to take this thing out and see what it feels like with a properly aligned suspension, because let's be honest, it's been a few years. Oh, the steering feels so tight. That is the first thing I noticed. Okay, wheels nice and straight again. That's excellent. God, oh my God. All that response is restored. There's no dead in this wheel anymore. Everything feels nice and tight, just like a European rack would. Just like my wife's BMW would. Oh. And I can feel everything in the road. I can feel every bump I run over. Oh, I can almost feel the contours of the bumps. Oh, this is excellent. I will say right now, I have to give a big shout out to a guy on Facebook who's on one of the LS GTO groups named Diego Lovato. He replaced his inner tie rods, and he made a quick little video and took some snaps showing him to do it. He inspired me to go out and buy these and change these on mine, and I'm so thankful he did, because this has reawoken the steering that this car once had. I can tell after driving at only 100 yards, it feels incredible. And oh my God, just one part of the car that was old and I've been able to make new again. So awesome. So this is the end of this episode, but unusually for me, there is going to be another episode tomorrow. I've got some more updates and more repairs I need to do on the GTO in preparation for a big event. So there will be another episode being dropped in the next 24 hours on that. That's going to do it for this episode of Josh's Car Corner. I will see you tomorrow.